All right, this Thursday will mark President Biden's first year in office. And needless to say, it has not been a good year for the president and his party. On Friday, the Republican Study Committee released a 4-page memo titled Biden Year 1, a presidency in crisis that outlines 10 areas where President Biden's priorities have created crises: the border, inflation, education, the supply chains, crime, big tech, China, Middle East, Afghanistan, and faith in our elections. Here with me to talk about all of those areas, but specifically the area of education, is our good friend, Congressman Bob Good of Virginia. He's a member of the House Freedom Caucus, also a member of the Education Labor Committee and the Budget Committee. He represents the 5th Congressional District of Virginia, where the issue of education, quite frankly, helped propel the state's newly elected, sworn-in governor into office. Bob, good to see you.
Great to be with you, Tony. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming in studio to be with us today.
Absolutely.
All right, your take on President Biden's first year. We're coming up to the end of his first year.
This is a president that most of us on our side certainly thought was going to be a bad president. Obviously I didn't support him when he ran, but I think most of us probably underestimated how good he would be at doing a bad job for the country. This is a president that makes Carter look competent and makes Obama look moderate.
When you look specifically at what's happening, we went through some of those lists some of those items on the list from the Republican Study Committee. I mean, you look at Afghanistan, you look at what's happening right now with Russia on the border of Ukraine. You've got the fourth missile being fired by North Korea. I mean, we're perceived as being weak, unable to accomplish anything domestically, our foreign policies in shambles. But what is this administration focusing on? I just saw last week where the Department of Education is going after a Christian university, the Lincoln University in Illinois, based on a transgender complaint. I mean, what's the priority of this administration?
Democrats in this administration in particular, along with their allies in the House, they are doubling down on their failed policies. There's not one issue, not one area, not one policy where you can point to success that would validate the election results from 2020. Democrats can't point to one thing that's working, one area where he's doing well. I would submit just the border crisis alone, never in the history of the country has a president intentionally, willfully done more to harm his own country than this president has to the United States, just with the border crisis alone.
Is there an intention? Is that intentional?
I do believe that they think that either Americans are too dumb to realize how well their policies are working, so they're doubling down for that reason, or they're just trying to do as much harm as they can with the time that they have left. When it comes to the border, they are globalists. They don't believe in American exceptionalism. They want to flood our country with illegal aliens to change the culture and change the dynamics and to change the voting bloc.
Well, when you see New York allowing illegal immigrants, those who are not citizens, well, I shouldn't say illegal immigrants, they're not citizens,
Right.
The ability to vote. Now, it's not in federal elections, they can't do that, but certainly that is the nose of the camel under the tent, because if you allow this in these large cities across America, eventually there'll be a clamoring for them to vote in federal elections as well.
Yeah, when you have an administration that promised amnesty for illegal aliens who are here to begin with, now has open borders allowing millions to flood across just in his first year, 2 million alone the first year, does not allow voter ID to be the law of the land, and at the same time wants to, we don't have to have proof of citizenship even to vote in this country, and then you've got the test case in New York where you've got, hey, let's go ahead and let illegal immigrants
Right.
vote now.
I mean, I think it's intentional. I think that the border is open with the hope of flooding new voters for Democratic candidates, whether initially it's in local elections, but eventually I think they want to do that nationwide.
These are unregistered Democrats. They're coming from 160 different countries. There's 2 million apprehensions at the border this year. That doesn't count the tens of thousands of gotaways, those who evaded apprehension at the border.
So, Congressman Good, let's talk about, I want to get to the education issue. You're on the Education Committee. That's not a place many Republicans want to be because it's been dominated by the left for so long, but silver lining there, we're seeing people pay attention to that. Parents, it was a big issue in Virginia. But before we get to that, one final thing on the issue of immigration. If the Republicans are able to regain the majority, which appears to be, I mean, quite possible. I mean, I think the Republicans would really have to mess up not to regain the majority. What can Congress do to address the border issue?
And the border issue ties right into education too, Tony, because as these illegal aliens come in who don't speak our language, the school systems, which are already overtaxed, under-resourced to begin with, are having to try to teach students in their native language, which how the school systems have the resources to do that. But there's so much opportunity costs and resource costs with the border being shut down now. There's billions and billions of dollars of costs being by the materials that have been left behind. We've got border wall that's already paid for. They weren't allowed to complete. So what Congress can do is to cut funding not give President Biden the funding that he wants unless he reinstates the border wall.
So basically using the purse strings.
We
that
do
Congress
control
has.
the power of the purse. We've got to be willing to shut down the government in order to use the leverage that we will have with the majority in the House, even if we don't have a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate, and to force this president from a funding standpoint.
I think the Republicans would have to make their priorities very clear up front.
That's right.
Because your window of opportunity is going to be in the early days of having the majority in Congress. Given this president's unfavorable ratings with the American people, I think the momentum would be with the new Congress.
Yes, he is a weak president now. He will be a terribly diminished and even weaker president a year from now when he has lost the majority, and hopefully in both houses, but certainly in the House of Representatives.
Congressman Good, let's talk education. By the way, you are absolutely right. It does tie into the issue of immigration because there was a time in our country when education played the role of assimilating immigrants into our country. Legal immigrants who came in, they were assimilated into to what it meant to be an American by being taught what America was about. Now it's more of we're actually, instead of the many becoming one, we are fragmenting our society, and there's probably no place that's played a greater role in that than in education.
Yes, and you can look at from what happens with immigrants when they come in and they're not patriotically assimilating, learning our language, embracing our culture, embracing our values as legalized citizens. Then what they do is they go to pockets where those who are like them from their countries are, and they live there in sort of a tribal fashion, separate from the rest of the greater, larger community. That's happened with Afghanistan. The 120 Afghanis that we brought over here, as they leave the bases or the places we've housed them, they go to where there's high population of Afghanis because they want to live that way and embrace that culture instead of the larger American culture.
I would think, based on what's happening in our schools, some of these people who risk their lives to come here, whether it's illegally or whatever, but they come here. If they go through our education system, I would think they would think, why did I bother coming here? Yeah. Because what they're being taught in our schools is to hate this country, that there's nothing special. I guess the one thing that gives me hope about people who are risking all to come to this country is that there's something still special about America that attracts people.
There's no plan B for the world other than America. There's not another country in the history of the world that's given more opportunity to people from all races, all ethnicities, all nationalities to advance themselves, to better themselves. There's no other beacon of freedom. There's no other country that's freed more people, evangelized more people, fed more people than the United States of America.
We've seen education in Virginia really be the propelling force behind the new governor, Governor Youngkin. Is this going to be an issue that sweeps across the country in this coming election?
When the Democrat Party is the party of closing schools and remote learning instead of in-person learning, mandates where we're forcing kids to wear masks all day, which is paramount to child abuse, forcing children to be vaccinated in order to attend school, teaching radical CRT and racist ideology in our schools, as well as radical transgender policies that are harmful to children. I think the silver lining from the pandemic, as parents have learned what their kids are being taught, you're going to see election results like Virginia.
So will Congress be able to address that if and when the Republicans regain the majority?
If we have the courage to do right, we'll certainly have that opportunity, and I hope to be part of that on the Education Committee.
Is that a funding issue? What will drive those changes at the state level?
Well, what we need to do is diminish the federal government's role in education and allow the states and the localities to do their job. It shouldn't be coming from the federal level. I'm in favor, as you probably know, in abolishing the Department of Education, but at least if we can't do that, let's diminish the federal mandates, let's diminish the federal intrusion, and certainly cut off things like the Biden administration wants to make condition federal funding on teaching CRT ideology in the schools.
When I've looked at this multiple times, and it fluctuates, when you look at the amount of money that actually comes from the federal government to the local schools, you think it would be like 50% of the funding, but it vacillates between 9 and maybe 11% or less, depending on the administration. But yet, it comes not with strings, but ropes, with cables, because the federal government, for that little bit of money, tells them what to do.
It's absolutely not worth it. The numbers that I've seen is actually 6 or 7% on average. So roughly half the funding comes from the local community, half of it comes from the state. Very small amount comes from the federal government. The states and locales ought to say, federal government, take your money, keep it. We don't want your mandates. We don't want your intrusion. It's bad enough to have your state capital telling you how to teach in your local community. You certainly don't want Washington doing it.
You're absolutely right. Bob Good, always great to talk with you. Thanks for coming in today.
Thank you, Tony.
And
God bless you.
Keep up the fight.
Appreciate the work you're doing.